Deathpixie disclaimer. This video was originally recorded in September 2024. There is swearing and profanity. Sources are listed in the description. This video is not monetized. Any ads you see provide revenue to the hosting site, not the creators. If you made it this far, geez, you have a lot of patience.
Deathpixie dancing on the lip of madness!
Welcome to shitty PowerPoint theater. Dignity not included.
And that ends Lester B. Pearson. So we will move on to the next person. And if you think my descriptions have been getting longer, oh boy, howdy, you don't even know. Our next Prime Minister is the illustrious, without a doubt known Pierre Elliot Trudeau. Le raison avant la passion. Reason over passion is one of his big quotes. A note from producer Rob is he was our JFK, except he was. Except he lived. He had many infamous moments. But there is one that isn't very often talked about. And I'll mention it now. So in his memoirs, which were published in 1993, he said that Joe Clark, was much more tough and aggressive than past Tory leader Robert Stanford, noting that those qualities served Clark well in his party winning the 1979 election victory. However, Trudeau also complimented Clark as a respectable leader and a better choice over Brian Mulroney, which really must have ruffled Brian Mulroney's feathers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, who had defeated Clark at a leadership convention in 1983. Trudeau, in fact, told his friends that the Tories had chosen the wrong man. And when Mulroney took over reins, Trudeau's Liberals actually attacked him with the slogan, "Bring back Joe." He was very much about bringing Canada together.
Yes.
In his legacy, he was also very smart, very sharp, very witty, very quick. And he also had a bit of a "I don't give a shit" attitude, which made
just a little,
very interesting. So obviously he did have 2 terms. Hey, where's my laser pointer? There we go. We do have 2 terms here. He did die in 2000. He was married once to Margaret Sinclair, and they did divorce in 1984. They had 4 children, which included... he had 4 children, which included the 3 sons he had with Margaret, which include Justin, Alexander, and Michael. One of them did tragically die in an avalanche, and we'll hear more about that when we actually talk about Justintrudeau. His 4th child is a daughter, and that would be their half-sister. Also big thing about him, he was connected with multiple celebrities, including Barbra Streisand. Like, this is... yeah.
Wow.
It's a thing. It's a thing. And unfortunately, you are so shocked you're frozen.
That's insane.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into it. So what did Pierre Elliot Trudeau do?
I'm really hoping it's recording on your end.
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna actually pause this. That's what we're gonna do. Sorry.
I don't know why, but we are having major technical issues, at least on... Excellent.
All right. That wraps up Lester B. Pearson. Let us move on to the next one. And if you thought shit was getting long, you don't even know. You have no idea. Because the next person is the illustrious, the infamous, the frequently quoted Pierre Elliot Trudeau. His big thing was la raison avant la passion, so reason over passion. It was part of the Liberal Party very famously. He had the 2 terms going on. He did die in 2000. He was married once to Margaret Sinclair, and they did in fact divorce in 1984. And he had 4 children, which included the 3 sons who were in the public eye quite a bit, Justin, Alexandra, and Michael. He had also connections to many celebrities, including Barbara Streisand. So, yeah.
I have to ask, did Barbara dedicate any songs to Pierre Trudeau?
Not that I know of. Producer Rob would like me to note that Pierre Elliot Trudeau was our JFK, except he lived.
He truly was, for better or for worse.
Yeah, he was also a consummate outdoorsman as well. So really, that's another big part of like Canadian iconography is going outside. He did have many infamous moments, which we will touch on. We don't have time to go into every single one. But what I will say is one that isn't really talked about outside of political circles was the fact that in his memoirs, he felt that Joe Clark was a much more tough and aggressive Tory leader than Robert Stanfield. And he felt that those qualities served Clark well in his party winning the 1979 election victory. Trudeau also complimented Clark as a respectable leader and a better choice over Brian Mulroney, who had defeated Clark in the leadership convention of 1983. And that must have pissed Brian Mulroney off to no end. Absolutely no end. Trudeau
why? Mulroney wasn't known as being spiteful or hateful. I don't understand where this Mulroney slander is coming from, Mary.
I know. Trudeau also told his friends that the Tories had chosen the wrong man, and when Mulroney took over the reins of the Progressive Conservatives, Trudeau's Liberals attacked them with the slogan, "Bring back Joe," which is just true hilarity to me. That's just amazing. Big theme that you're going to see overall is he was really about bringing the English and the French together. Also, interestingly enough, one of his gaffes actually turned into a good thing overall. So it's interesting. Anyway, so contrary to popular belief that would portray Pierre Elliot Trudeau as the worst prime minister ever, he actually wasn't. He did, in fact, continue with a lot of the paths that were started by his predecessors. So overall, admirers of him praised what they considered to be the force of his intellect and his political acumen that maintained national unity over the Quebec sovereignty movement. So we'll get into some of these. So he did maintain national unity. So that was during the Quebec sovereignty movement and referendum, fostering a pan-Canadian identity. So that included things like bilingual packaging, for example, that we have here, suppressing a Quebec terrorist crisis. Now, that being said, there is controversy around it, and we'll get to that in a moment, but just know that ultimately it was an international incident that had to be dealt with swiftly by the federal government. Otherwise, you're basically, if you didn't do anything, you were welcoming another world power coming in and doing it for you. So it was basically trying to avoid an even worse international incident, basically. Multiculturalism policy. So it was the first of its kind in the world and recognized a plurality of cultures. So a multicultural policy with a bilingual framework. Apparently this annoyed public opinion in Quebec because they were like, well, Canada is a country of two nations, which, as we established in one of our earlier episodes, Canada is actually a nation of nations when we look at Indigenous people. To say that Canada is a nation of two nations is, very dismissive of a huge part of our history and how we were formed. So we've got institutional reform with the Official Bilingualism and the Official Languages Act. So that was a continuation of what Lester B. Pearson was doing. The patriation of the Constitution, so fully patriating it, and establishment of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That is a huge one.
That's huge.
It is huge. We have procedural reforms to make Parliament and the Liberal caucus meetings run more efficiently. Expanded the size of the role of the Prime Minister's office, making it more involved and aware. Expanding social welfare programs, greatly expanded unemployment insurance, and then amended the National Housing Act. Joined the G7 group of major economic powers, which is a big thing for Canada, being a quote-unquote young country. Expanded social welfare programs, passage of the bill C-127. So, excuse me, sorry. Access to the Information Act. This was based on Clark's Freedom of Information Act. Bill C-84 was passed by the House of Commons, which completely abolished the death penalty. There was an incredibly long debate before the vote. Voluntary freeze on oil prices, which actually did do some help, well controversial. Economic nationalism. So that's the creation of Petro-Canada and the National Energy Program, which eventually got sold off by other people and ended up screwing us decades later after it was sold off. Wage and price controls by passing the Anti-Inflation Act and creating a anti-inflation board, which was dissolved in 1979. Boy, could we use something like that now? Feeling the pain.
Tint, wink, wink.
Tax reform with a fully indexed personal income tax, granting asylum to refugees who were called so-called boat people. When I go back to the suppression of the Quebec terrorist crisis, so this is known as the 1970 October crisis and the FLQ, abduction of James Cross and Pierre Laporte. Pierre Laporte was in fact murdered by them. And this saw the activation of the War Measures Act, which was deactivated after the FLQ arrests were made. Now, the reason why that is considered so incredibly controversial was because there are certain powers that happen with the War Measures Act. It allows the government to just come in and sweep and do everything. But that being said, the abduction of James Cross is the big one here. He was a British diplomat. He was not a Canadian citizen. He was a British diplomat. And that was then followed by Pierre Laporte, who was a Quebec Labor Minister, and they later murdered him. Excuse me. So you can see where the thing of, well, they had to go in and do it this way because they abducted a British diplomat. That means Britain is going to come in and get their diplomat if the diplomat doesn't come back. And then you have, well, that quickly escalated to murder. Yeah. Excuse me. And nobody wanted what was going on with the IRA to happen here. That was the massive fear. That's why this sweep happened. So yes, controversial, but to the same end, it was deactivated when he said it was going to be deactivated. And to be perfectly frank, if he didn't do it, we'd be looking at an international incident with the British government, which not a good look when you're fighting for things like full patriotization of the Constitution. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's a major controversy, and I wanted to just notice that here. Passage of Bill C-127, it redefined rape and indecent assault as sexual assault, defined sexual assault with a weapon or causing bodily harm, and aggravated sexual assault, and also made penalties against men and women equal, including marital rape. That was a huge one.
Yeah.
I need you to understand, it was viewed that if your husband forced you to have sex with him, it's not rape because you're married and you're expected to do that. It also took away, that bill took away penetration as a requirement for sexual assault. That was another big thing. Because usually by penetration, it's penis in vagina. And we all know other sexual acts, non-consensual sexual acts in particular, can occur without that happening.
Yes, and some people are of the sexual orientation where that cannot happen due to lack of biological parts.
Yep. So that was a big thing, as well as it took away the ability to use the victims / survivors' sexual history against them in a court of law. Which there's a lot of controversy with how that gets used or doesn't get used in a court of law, but that's a conversation for another time. I just wanted to note what that bill was.
Yeah.
The Canada Act, that is so a lot of people might hear Canada Act, Constitution, Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So the Canada Act included the Constitution Act and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it was proclaimed by Queen Elizabeth II on April 17th, 1982. And it basically, that charter represented the final step in Trudeau's liberal vision of a fully independent Canada based on fundamental human rights and the protection of individual freedoms, as well as those of linguistic and cultural minorities.
Yeah. You have no idea how big that is.
It is. And another big thing to add, Section 35 clarified the issues of Aboriginal and equality rights.
Yeah.
And also including establishing the previously denied Aboriginal rights of Métis. Section 15 deals with equality rights and has been used to remedy social discrimination against many minority groups. And then several sections also talk about discrimination based on gender and sex, and they have in fact been added to include, as we continue on coming with multiple terms and things, to be inclusive of all of that, which is pretty cool. So essentially, either directly or indirectly, the Charter influences every aspect of Canadian life.
It really does.
Unfortunately, there is a notwithstanding clause. It has been rarely used. There are, I think it was 4 or 5 specific instances where it was used. The unfortunate thing is Trudeau didn't actually want it in there, but in order to get the provinces to agree to it, it had to be in there, for better or worse. And that's probably the only true criticism of the Charter, is the notwithstanding clause, because particularly today, there are people who I really truly
invoke
fear
the notwithstanding clause,
and
or
plan
can
to
invoke the notwithstanding clause, and don't understand what that clause is put in there to actually stop.
Yeah. With the Quebec referendum, he actually took it incredibly seriously, and a week prior to the referendum, he delivered one of his most well-known speeches. So it was a big deal. He was actually quite involved with that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. We can go, I think you already know, we agree with like nationalization of resources, because ultimately it keeps prices lower and well, there's more quality control.
Yeah.
However,
bit.
it led to like this sort of Western alienization thing, and that's where you're seeing kind of people at the top who are like, well, you're keeping me from earning everything that I could be earning. But that's why we don't have that as something that would be both pro or con, because again, we established our biases here. It's better for the people that you have these kinds of essential resources nationalized. And the tax reforms. So corporate Canada was not happy with the shift to increase taxes on them. Many of the more radical provisions that Trudeau would have wanted were taken out after debate, which is unfortunate because I don't think he would have had the deficits that he had they actually, taxed corporations the way that they should be taxed. Big thing is the fully indexed person income tax system. It had the exemptions, it had the brackets, and it was meant to match inflation. So that was a big thing for personal taxes as well. So I think those were I have so many details on this, but those were the big ones. I cannot, and I don't think you can stress enough how big the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is.
Yeah.
And
it is we've used landmark before, but this is a landmark that is beyond landmark, if at all possible.
It was an incredible achievement, and the fact he only had to make the one concession is a big deal in it. Yeah. It's a huge thing. On the con side, critics accused him of arrogance, economic mismanagement. I will note it wouldn't have been mismanaged if you let him do the corporate taxes. Anyway, and the unduly centralizing of Canadian decision-making to the detriment of the culture of Quebec and the economy of the prairies. Which to that I say, like, you have to operate as a country, guys. We come on. We redistribute taxes for the betterment of different nations, for the betterment of the provinces and territories. So, you got to play ball.
Just a bit.
Story. Yeah, you got to play ball. But that's the major criticism in a nutshell. So his major gaffe is his FU exit. So he had this appointment deal with the Governor General and Turner. So as he exited, I think it was I can't remember if it was over 100 or over 200 appointments happened to friends and stuff like that, to these well-paying important positions. Now, for me to really tell if that was disingenuous, I would have to go through each appointed person and their job history and qualifications. And I apologize, but
we can't do that here.
We can't do that. I would have to be paid to do that. That is a lot of people to go through, especially people who information is not readily available. I can't look it up in an encyclopedia and get a really quick handle on it. So that I will say, though, it was ultimately an FU move to just be like, hey, Turner, you deal with that. Bye-bye. Yeah. But in terms of was it completely disingenuous, I don't know. I can't do the analysis. So that I do want to acknowledge that. He did use his relationships with various political leaders as leverage to attain things. So this could be for the positive. This could also be for the negative, such as controversial relations with China, for example. There was the stagflation, but stagflation coupled with consecutive budget deficits. Again, those deficits wouldn't be there if you let the corporate taxes happen. But whatever, it happened. But remember, there are people hurting, and yeah, it's not good to run a deficit, but it's also not good to, possibly face what happened during the Great Depression happening to your people. So
yeah,
it's, I don't know what to say, because that was still a real fear. We don't want that to happen. There are certain events that have left their mark on generations of people. That's one of them. There was stagflation that happened, just in general thing. And then this is the interesting one, the white paper. So what they were trying to do was unite First Nations and Canadians by bringing them under the same status and eliminating any provisions. Well, that's difficult to do because, again, we explained the overall difficulties with that is they've a lot of Indigenous people, they view themselves as separate nations from each other or related communities to each other, but still different. So that is quite difficult to do. Even if we go with like kind of overall groupings, you're still talking about, between 3 and 8 distinctive groups. So the thing is, though, the white paper didn't pass. What ended up happening was it was the first major national mobilization of Indian and Aboriginal activists against the federal government's proposal, which actually led to Trudeau setting aside that legislation. That is a major thing, which is they all organized, got together, had their voices heard, and had a prime minister listen. And that is why in the charter, they're specifically mentioned, because again, we are a nation of nations here. We are Canada, but we do have multiple nations within us, and it's important to recognize that. So that's the one where I'm like, it's the one gaffe where it actually oddly had a positive outcome and really started something. So, I'm trying not to be overly biased and overly praise. Like, I'm sure if you got on his bad side, you'd hate him.
Yep.
But I do want to notice that it's one of those interesting examples of a gaffe actually being a bit of a watershed moment for activism. Some context I want to add to this. He, in fact, offered to form a coalition government with Ed Broadbent's NDP, but was rebuffed on that. So I think that's interesting because you would have seen this kind of coalition united left of center group, which is interesting. In 1969, after years of sharing power with the churches, the DIA took over sole control of the residential school program, and that is when you started seeing things close. So this is long, but I do feel it's important.
Yeah.
So in 1975, the final Alberta residential school closed. In 1970, the final residential school in Nunavut, which was then Northwest Territories, closed. 1974, the final residential school in Ontario closed. 1979, the final residential school in Quebec closed. 1969, the final residential school in Yukon closed. 1984, the final residential school in BC closed. 1980, the final residential school in Newfoundland closed. So that all happened while Trudeau was in office. I will say the scoop was still going on, but definitely the closure of those schools was a step in the right direction.
Yes.
Definitely a big thing, but like we said, the biggest achievement was the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is a watershed document for Canada. We can't stress that enough.
No, we can't.
Now then, you cannot cut a country in two any more than you can cut a human being in two. If you do, you do not have two human beings, you have a corpse. Very succinct, very intelligent, and very sound-biting. So I feel that this quote is just a true example of how he spoke.
Do you know what year that quote was out of?
I am sorry, no, but I believe it was from during, was it the Quebec referendum, I believe, is when it was happening. He is the most recent prime minister to have won 4 elections. He won 3 majority governments and 1 minority government, which is quite an achievement. And to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. His tenure of 15 years and 164 days makes him Canada's 3rd longest serving prime minister, behind JohnAMacdonald and William Lyon Mackenzie King.
Don't you mean Wilfrid Laurier?
Oh, sorry.
And William Lyon Mackenzie King?
Yes, Wilfrid Laurier and William Lyon Mackenzie King. I apologize. My notes are wrong, but this is why
I can't believe I have to go and defend Waffly Willie.
He had connections. So Trudeau mania was a thing. It was a big thing. It was like Beatlemania. I cannot describe that enough. Like, it was insane. It had never been seen before in Canadian politics, and I would say seen since. But then COVID and the memes happened, and well, you'll see what the meme train brings later. Okay. He had connections to and with multiple celebrities and politicians. He was friends with Fidel Castro. He was the first world leader to meet with John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono on their tour for world peace. Apparently, Lennon called Trudeau a beautiful person, and that if all politicians were like Pierre Trudeau, there would be world peace.
Oh, wow.
Diplomat John G.H. Halstead noted of Trudeau that Trudeau preferred short briefings on issues before meeting with other leaders, and he would usually try to wing his way through international meetings by being witty. So apparently Trudeau didn't care about foreign policy as much as he cared about domestic affairs, and that's what he noticed about it. But also, I mean, if you had his wit, wouldn't you wing it too?
You probably would.
Like, not gonna lie. Nixon had a great quote about Trudeau. Nixon in 1971 said on the record that asshole Trudeau. Which, just makes me like Trudeau more, that Nixon didn't like him. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, I'm trying to think. You gotta be some special kind of person for Richard Nixon to call you an asshole. You gotta be pretty damn special, one way or the other.
Yeah, Trudeau, there was a mutual contempt between them. Trudeau even said, living next to you, referring to the USA, is in some way like sleeping with a giant elephant. No matter how friendly and even-tempered the beast, one is affected by every twitch and grunt. Which, is an apt description even today. As they head into their election.
Yeah. So basically, what you have to understand about the relationship between Canada and the United States, this is not Arthur Meighen and William Lyon Mackenzie King.
Yeah.
We are far beyond that. These guys would rather hate fuck each other and watch as their wives and or children found out than they would just trying to settle things over a beer.
I will note, though, that when President Jimmy Carter came in, relations between America and Canada actually improved, and they had a much better rapport with each other.
Well, I wonder Jimmy why. Carter's Jimmy Carter.
No,
you can't get mad at Jimmy Carter.
That can't possibly be it.
I don't know.
That can't possibly be the reason, can it?
No.
No, must not be. Excuse me. there is a lot that goes on. There's a lot of details. I can go into things. I'm very much talking about tertiary stuff. But we have a lot to get through. Just know that despite like this weird hatred for Pierre Elliot Trudeau, which was really felt because there were people who got behind Brian Mulroney like he was the freaking martyr of something, is really unfounded and actually kind of belittles and belies what he managed to accomplish. And again, maybe it's our bias showing, but fuck you, corporations. You deserve to be taxed, and the people deserve to have a living and a thriving wage, and certain social assistances and a catchment net. Nobody wants to be left out to dry.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't really know that from.
Now then, before we talk about his CV, would you like to hear some quotes? Because there are so many and they're so good.
So Trudeau, especially in his later years, was known as the King of Shade. And so I'm more than happy to hear some quotes.
All right, so we got some good quotes. The most famous quote when talking about surely you won't enact the War Measures Act. Just watch me. Luck, that's when preparation and opportunity meet. I've been called worse things by better people, which is just...
That is just a great line.
What shall we do about the abortion bill? Pay it. Which is beautiful. It is wonderful to be despised if deep down we know we are right. Some things I never learned to like. I don't like to kiss babies, though I don't mind kissing their mothers. The gall. I never actually got around to taping conversations with my guests, but there are a lot of things you can learn from a man like Nixon. My life is one long curve full of turning points. When they are, when they are 50 yards from Parliament Hill, they are no longer honorable members. They are just nobodies.
Oh.
Burn. If I found in my own ranks that a certain number of guys wanted to cut my throat, I'd make sure to cut their throats first.
Which, I mean, is only fair.
Yeah. Which, by the way, what can we get a Shakespeare-like play of Trudeau? Like that feels like something out of Caesar. You know what I mean? Feels like a Caesar type. Yeah. The essential ingredient of politics is timing. Now the quotes start getting more serious, but I will pick out a few ones, which are nice. Blah, blah, blah. So, here we go. Canada is not a country for the cold of heart or the cold of feet.
It's true.
Yep. I am peaceful, but I am not a pacifist in the philosophical sense. The next time you see Jesus Christ, ask him what happened to the just society he promised 2,000 years ago.
Oh.
I am much too busy Sorry. I was too busy doing my job and living my life to spend time keeping notes for some future volume of memoirs. The churches must realize when they take a position on a political event that they must accept the rules of the game.
It's true.
Which actually I feel that applies to a lot of things. If you're gonna step in, you don't get to be like, no, you can't say that about me. No, you're in the game now. So there you go. Canada is seen to some as a confederation of shopping centers.
Oh my god.
Canada is a country whose main exports are hockey players and cold fronts. Our main imports are baseball players and acid rain.
Yep.
In academic life, you seek to state absolute truths. In politics, you seek to accommodate truth to the facts around you. I recognize that in some cases it is important to have freedom and justice. It is more important to have freedom and justice than to have peace. I'm impatient not with the House of Commons as an institution, but with the way in which it is operated. This doesn't prove I don't believe in participatory democracy. I'm sometimes impatient with young people who demonstrate at my meetings and who don't want an argument, but who just want to go on television as having been there and made a fuss. This doesn't mean I don't believe in participatory democracy. So he really was more so criticizing the fact that if you've agreed upon the system and you've entered into a system, you need to operate by that. You can't just, go off and listen to yourself talk or something like that. So yeah, there are a lot of quotes, and we can tell that he starts to, I tried to organize them as shady to more serious and everything like that. He also had the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation as well, that he used. And there's so much. The breadth is insane. I've only said about a quarter of the quotes that I have.
Yeah.
Well, we need to get into the CV, so say hello to the sexy moose again.
Hi, sexy moose.
So he did, in fact, when he was younger, in college, he fought for Quebec nationalism. But the thing is, he later expanded his worldview and saw Canada as a full nation. And it is something to be said for getting out of, you see it with small towns, getting out of where you are and expanding your worldview and actually understanding things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. He did assist in managing his mother's large inheritance upon the death of his father. In World War II, he did oppose conscription for overseas service. And there's a quote on that. If you were a French Canadian in Montreal at the time, you did not automatically believe that this was a just war. In Montreal in the early 1940s, we still knew nothing about the Holocaust, and we tended to think of this war as a settling of scores among the superpowers, not realizing the very real aspects of it on the line. He went to Université de Montréal and studied politics and law. He joined the Canadian Officers Training Corps. He did articulate for a year. He got a master's in political economy at Harvard University's Graduate School of Public Administration, which is now the John F. Kennedy School of Government. In the lectures there, that's when he realized the historical significance of World War II. His topic of his Harvard dissertation was on communism and Christianity, but he ended up not finishing it, and instead he went to study political science in Paris, France, and briefly entered a doctoral program to study under the socialist economist Harold Laski at the London School of Economics. Keynesian economics and social sciences were essential to the creation of a good life in a democratic society, is what he was getting into at that point. He became a follower of personalism, which was influenced by Emmanuel Manur Nikoliev Berdyaev, and a rejection of nationalism and separatism. So the summer of 1994, he started doing world travels. So he went to Poland, and he actually saw Auschwitz. He went to Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, the Middle East, including Turkey, Jordan, and southern Iraq. And he did it in a backpacking style. He also used his British passport instead of a Canadian passport for his travels through Pakistan, India, China, and Japan. And he would have a tendency to wear local clothing to blend in. So he wasn't staying in fancy hotels and stuff like that. He was actually going amongst the people and actually experiencing and seeing these different things. So according to The Economist, when Trudeau returned to Canada in 1949, after an absence of 5 years, his mind was seemingly broadened from his studying at Harvard Institute d'Études Politiques, which was in Paris, the LSE in London, and then also on his travels. And he was actually appalled at the narrow nationalism in his native French-speaking Quebec and the authoritarianism of the province's government. And the reason why I wanted to highlight that was I wanted to show how opinions upon experiences can change. And they can, in fact, change for the better in terms of expanding worldview. So he comes back and he becomes a lawyer and labor activist in Quebec politics. And he actually becomes involved. He starts opposing the Conservative Union Nationale. And he supported workers in the asbestos strike. He was also the co-founder and editor of Cité Libre, which helped provide an intellectual basis of the Quiet Revolution. He did a lot of editing as well. He argued that the asbestos miners' strike of 1949 was a seminal event in Quebec's history, marking the beginning of resistance to conservative francophone clerical establishment and anglophone business class that had long ruled the province. So you can already see the roots here. He was, in fact, blacklisted by Premier Duplessis in Quebec. He became a civil servant in Ottawa. So he worked in the Privy Council office of the Liberal Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent as the economic policy advisor. He had close ties with the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. He was associate professor of law at Université de Montreal. He also was an example of somebody who put his money where his mouth was. So he was actually originally part of the New Democratic Party, which was formerly the CCF. But he felt that they could not achieve power and then joined the Liberal Party. And he actually admired labor unions. He tried to infuse his Liberal Party with some of their reformist zeal. And he began to reject Social Democratic and Labour parties, arguing that they should put aside their narrow goals and instead join forces with the Liberals to fight for democracy first. So you're starting to see that kind of political mindset happening there as well, which is, what are we going to prioritize here? He did criticize the Liberal Party of Lester B. Pearson when it came to supporting arming bomberic missiles in Canada with nuclear warheads. He turned down a teaching position in Queen's University, preferring to teach in Quebec, and he joined the Liberal Party, and with Gerard Pelletier and Jean-Marchand, the media dumped them as the three wise men. And here we start seeing the political part happen. Goes to House of Commons. He becomes Pearson's parliamentary assistant. And he starts working abroad. He became the Minister of Justice and Attorney General. He created more flexible divorce laws, decriminalized homosexuality, by the way, and legalized abortion. So that was the landmark Criminal Law Amendment Act. It's amongst what I already mentioned, include new gun ownership restrictions and the legalization of contraception, as well as lotteries, oddly enough. Also, the authorization of breathalyzer tests on suspected drunk drivers. Please keep in mind, remember the time period? People were full on drinking and driving home. It was a dangerous, dangerous thing.
It was a style of the time.
when he was defending the bill that was decriminalizing homosexual acts between consenting adults, he told reporters there's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation. What's done in private between adults doesn't concern the criminal code. It was a big thing. He took over for Pearson and called a early election. Oh man, there's a lot. There's a lot. There's like a whole riot that happened on the eve of the election. It was so much. There were rioters. Trudeau actually stayed in his seat, didn't show any signs of fear, and he was this image of a defiant prime minister that actually impressed the public. And then he handedly won the election with a strong majority. And this was the Liberals' first majority since 1953. He was the leader of the opposition as well. There's a lot that goes on there. But there is him wanting to work with the NDP for certain social credit programs, etc. Oh man, it's a lot that he did. Finally, he is prime minister, and we spoke about the back and forth aspect. He officially retired from politics on June 30th, 1984, after he used the trope, a walk in the snow. So he'd have a walk in the snow, and that's how he'd come to his decisions. He then practiced law at a Montreal law firm. He successfully campaigned against the Meech Lake and Charlottetown Accords, which proposed recognizing Quebec as a quote-unquote distinct society, which would have allowed Quebec deportation of language minorities, which is not a good look. Not a good look. He argued that it would weaken federalism, but more importantly, the Charter of Rights if it was implemented. He remained active in international affairs. He did a lot of stuff. Published his memoirs in 1993. He was devastated by the death of his son, Michel Trudeau, who was killed in an avalanche on November 13th, 1998. And then Pierre Elliot Trudeau himself died 2 years later. That avalanche, Justintrudeau and his family actually became highly involved in a search rescue association that we'll get into that teaches people the importance of avalanche safety and mountain search and rescue, etc., etc. So that is Pierre Elliot Trudeau. It's a lot, man. It is
a lot.
And you can speak to how much I summarized. Do you have anything to say?
So here's what I can say. Very few people's CVs speak for themselves. Trudeau is one of them. Regardless of how you felt, again, are you really going to minimize his work on the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? Perhaps our most, landmarked piece of legislation ever made.
Yeah.
I don't think you can. And as much as I do have issues with stuff his son has done, that does not extend out to the father.
We also didn't go into his personal life. I find that the more controversial stuff kind of happens there. But I haven't gone into anybody's personal life really in detail.
Hey, this is Trapdoor Crabsworth for deathpixie. If you liked our content, please like this video and subscribe. And if you want to see more, just check out our links in the description. Do it or Miri will kill you.